Welcome back to our final month of our Riley Blake Table Topper of the Month program. This month, our final topper is going to be called Shamrock Love and is focused around the celebration of St. Patrick's Day. We are going to be fine-tuning our half square triangle technique in this month's program. Lots and lots of half square triangles. It should be a lot of fun here and a lot of repetition. So you should be a master of the exact size half square triangle when this is finished. Let's start with talking about the cutting instructions that we have. Here is a portion of our runner. So if you have your kit instructions out, you want to pull them out, you can. One suggestion that we have for you is if you are going to starch your fabrics prior, you may want to specifically look at the shades of green because they're not really labeled for you, okay? And it could be a little challenging and to label your greens before you starch, or at least maybe snap a picture of them. The rest of them, we can tell which one is Riley red, which one's orange, daffodil, Riley green. There's a azure, raspberry, and Kelly. It's pretty obvious, but these greens can be funny to tell, especially the 4x10 piece of greens that you have. We have grass, spring green, sweet pea, and basil, and they're the ones that go into making our shamrock. So I thought I would take a moment and show you here what is what in terms of color. And I have the Riley Blake color chart here so that I was fortunate enough to have that in our possession so that we could make sure that we had everything correct. This shade that you see right here is considered grass. Spring green is, it's hard to tell in this one, but I believe it's this one right here is spring green. You also have sweet pea, and sweet pea is the light green that's there, and then you have a basil, which is a darker green. So let me show you. Here is grass, basil, sweet pea, and spring green. So all very, very close. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. They're all going to go into the shamrock. You can play around with those in that you can't go wrong. That's there, but just pay attention to your greens and that you don't accidentally cut your shamrock pieces out of the piece that was meant for here or out of one of the corner units. Okay. Now there is some cutting changes that, not really changes so much as it was some alterations that we do to try to help you minimize fabric or fabric waste in general. With the alpine cotton, now this is the one that is designed to be our binding, so that's this one here. This is alpine. In alpine, they tell you to cut a 4.5-inch strip by the width of fabric, and then you're going to cut 2 4.5-inch squares and 2 2.5-inch squares. Out of a 42-inch fabric, you're basically cutting, what, 16 inches? So you can take that piece of fabric that you have here, this 6-inch piece, and you can, or excuse me, your 15-inch by width of fabric. I would go ahead and cut your binding off of this. 2 1/4 is what is suggested, and it is very close. If you try to do 2 1/2, you may not have enough, but if you are conservative in the way that you cut your binding and you cut those H and J squares, you may be able to get 2 1/2. If we look at the hint of mint is going to be the border of this table topper. We highly suggest that you cut your border strips first. So go ahead and cut your 4 3.5-inch strips for border. And then out of the remaining fabric, cut yourself 2 4-inch squares. Don't cut yourself a 4-inch by width of fabric strip. If you just take what's left, cut 2 4-inch squares out of it, you'll just have a bigger scrap left that you can use for something else. Completely up to you. These are just observations and suggestions that we have found. Now, with the white fabric, the background, this confetti cotton white, there is square T. They ask you to cut a 4 1/8 inch square, and that is correct. You do want to cut 4 1/8. Don't try to make it bigger. Don't try to oversize it. These are the triangles that are going to be used to create this stem. So 4 1/8 is what you actually want to cut. You can then also cut out of that rest of that 4 1/8. You'll be able to get some additional pieces that you need, like the Y squares that they have you cut out of a 2-inch strip. You can actually get that out of this 4 1/8 inch strip, and then down here at the bottom, you'd only have to cut 1.5 inches. So the first thing that we're going to do is make half square triangles. The half square triangle units for this project here are all the 4-inch squares. Once you have your fabrics right sides together, you're going to draw a line from corner to corner. Your choice of what you use to mark that line, it is also going to be your cutting line. And I wouldn't go and grab a Sharpie or anything, but a number 2 lead pencil, a friction pen, water-soluble pen, really doesn't matter. We're going to sew a 1/4 inch from each side of that line. So I would get all your squares matched up with their background fabric and just sit and chain piece these, feed one in, feed the next one in, and then come around, clip them apart, and turn around and go down the other side. Just do your chain piecing. Once you've got them sewn a 1/4 inch from that marked line on both sides of the line, take any ruler that you like and go ahead and cut on the line. Okay, so that we separate this into 2 half square triangles. Now, this triangle is probably not going to be the right size. We need the triangle, these half square triangles are going to be squared up to 3.5 inches square. So we need to do some trimming. Yeah, just a little bit bigger. So there are several ways to trim. And the first way that I'm going to trim or remind you trimming is using the folded corner clipper. Now we've been using this multiple times throughout the year here. So I'm going to take my half square triangle. I'm going to place this ruler on top of. I'm going to line up this line with my sewn line that I have there. And I'm going to make sure that my 3.5 inch mark here on the ruler is either at the edge of my square or just above it. So I'm going to leave a little bit there for me to be able to trim. And I'm going to trim up across that little bit at the top and then trim down the side. I'm going to flip this over. So now that the edge that I just trimmed is now down here at the bottom, I'm going to line this up at 3.5. So my line here, that notched corner should fit right into that notched corner there. I'm going to trim across the top and trim down the side. So you have just a bit. Now, depending upon how big yours, if you didn't sew a true 1/4 inch seam from the line, you may end up a little short. So you may want to sew one full square first and test it before you sew all like 80 of them. So before you then have to sit and cut them all down. These As like they are stated in the pattern, your seams are going to get pressed open for this table runner or table topper. Okay, so all of your seams are getting pressed open. Now, if you don't have a folded corner clipper and you wanted to trim your half square triangles after they're already pressed, you can. I'm gonna just finger press this, but I would definitely do this on the ironing board so that you have your half square triangle. I'm going to use a square ruler. And the reason I use a square ruler is because the 45-degree line runs from the corner. So I'm going to put that 45-degree line right down the middle of my seam, and I'm going to position it so that I make sure that the 3.5-inch mark on the ruler is either at the cut edge of my fabric or above it. Because if your 3.5-inch line is below any fabric, you're going to be trimming this to be smaller. And then I'm going to trim up and across the top. Take this square, I'm going to flip it and line up again, diagonal line, 3.5 on the second cut goes directly on our nice clean cut edges, and we will cut up and across the top. If you are left-handed, I usually use the ruler, not the ruler itself upside down, but flipped around so that my number 1 is in this corner, and then I can work this direction as a left-hander. Or you can get the new left-handed, Creative Grids makes left-handed rulers where they are numbered, so you don't have to look at your numbers upside down. And that's going to give you your 3.5-inch squares. So you're going to get them all sewn up, pressed and trimmed to being 3.5-inch squares. Once those are all done, you can, if you like, either set them to the side or pull out your diagram and sew all of these same colors together so that they follow the pattern that's showing. Okay, so the center section here is going to meet. Okay, it's going to give you that effect of a flying geese, dead center. And then they point one direction and then they point the other. The suggestion in the pattern is that all the seams go a certain direction. So for example, the red row, all the seams are being pressed towards the left. In the orange one, they're going towards the right. And in yellow, they're going towards the left. And the reason for that is so that when you go to put these rows together, these seams will be pressed in the opposite direction and will nest into each other to help you get the nice exact point that you have at that intersection. Once you have your rows sewn together, then you can sew these 3 rows together into one larger unit. We suggest pressing this seam open. So press that seam open. That kind of helps reduce some bulkiness at the points, specifically in the section of this where this flying geese unit kind of comes together, or a faux flying geese unit, because it's actually 2 half square triangle units. Helps to kind of get a nicer point at that, and plus your long armor or your machine quilting will appreciate not having to go through quite as much bulk at that point. Now, once you have those 2 units done, you can set them to the side, because the next thing that we're going to make is our shamrock and our heart unit. Shamrock is pretty easy. We are going to make basically a 4-patch, and then you're going to stitch and flip, triangles or stitch and flip squares, excuse me, onto 3 corners to kind of give this a rounded look. In the instructions, they have you go through and add the folded corner to each of the squares. They tell you how many to make of each color combination and then put them together. If you would like, you could sew the 4-patch and then do the folded corner. Completely up to you if you want to do it that way, or you could pre-do it. For me, these are small, and so I prefer to sew this into a 4-patch. It just gives me something bigger to hold on to when I'm trying to sew and then flip back. Your folded corner instructions are just like what we've done in the past. We're going to place a square, right sides together. We're just going to pretend, draw a line, and sew on the line from corner to corner, just like is instructed on page 2 of your pattern. You have 3 different style of leaves. They call them leaf 1, 2, and 3. You're going to make 2 of leaf 1, 2 of leaf 2, and 2 of leaf 3 because there are 2 shamrock blocks in this pattern. You have to make this stem. So this stem is, you are going to take a 4.5-inch green square. This is square H. It starts out as a square. You're going to basically sew and flip a white square in one corner, and then you're going to trim and press that open, and then you're going to sew and flip another square in the opposite corner and press that open. So you can see here is one and another. Okay, press that seam open. You're going to do that twice so that you have 2 stems that come out of it. Lay out your shamrock and then sew your shamrock together. Once you have all your leaf units together and your stem made, I would lay them out so that you don't accidentally get one of these leaves rotated incorrectly. We're going to sew 2 leaves together, the other leaf and stem, press the seam one direction and press the other seam the other. That way when you put these right sides together, that seam will nest right here in the center. And then you can press this seam down towards the block with the stem. Once that is finished, this square should be an 8.5-inch square. If your block is not 8.5-inch square, I would highly recommend that you don't cut rectangles X and W until you get this unit pieced. Because if this is not an 8.5-inch square, you can fix that by cutting this border piece slightly larger. So that after that is sewn on, this will be a 12.5-inch square. So we're going to make 2 12.5-inch squares that contain the shamrock. And then we're going to make a heart block with using those same sew and flip methods. We have a rectangle of white. You're going to be using the U square in the one corner, and then you're going to be using 2 of the Y squares in the other. Don't make them both identical. Okay, they are different. There is a left side and a right side to this heart. If you do them both the same, when you flip this to join it, it's not going to be a heart. So make sure that you follow your diagrams to do the left side and then to do the right side. Once your 2 sides are finished, you're going to sew them together down the middle. And then we're going to add a top and bottom. Again, this should be a 6.5-inch square when it's finished. And then we're going to sew a rectangle to the top and the bottom of this. And this unit here, right in the middle, should measure 6.5 by 12.5 when it's finished. And then you're going to assemble the remainder of the quilt top, or excuse me, the tabletop, using the shamrock and heart in the middle. Pay attention to the direction in which you are joining the half square triangle units. You don't want to accidentally get this one flipped so that it goes the other way. Then you're going to add the final border with the half square triangles in the corner. And then you will have your Shamrock Love table topper. This table topper is probably the most intricately quilted table topper that we have had all year. But if you've been keeping up and quilting your toppers as you go, you should be an expert quilter now. If we look and kind of break this diagram down here, let's start with the half square triangle blocks. They are just straight stitched or echo quilted just along the longer edge. So if we look at here, they've just come probably about 1/4 to 1/2 inch away from the edge of this long particular seam. And they only travel in the one direction for that. The flying geese section, or the faux flying geese unit that's here in the center, they have done some squiggles inside of that one closest to the middle. The others come up and then travel back down towards the other side. The heart in the center has no quilting in it whatsoever. The shamrock has what we call a corner twist in it, or what I call a corner twist. But basically what we're doing is kind of traveling a small half circle or an arc from corner to corner. And that helps to just kind of stitch that down. You can kind of see, it kind of gives it an orange peel effect. And so it's just done on the two sides to give each leaf kind of a secondary look. The background in and around the heart and shamrock is heavily quilted with free motion swirls. And then the border is quilted with a edge to edge pattern. And it looks like in the corner there is a heart in each corner. The edge to edge design here kind of looks like a leaf and a shamrock, kind of to mimic what's happening there in the center of our particular quilt. Well, I hope that you have enjoyed this year of your table toppers. I hope that if you've been traveling along with us all year long, that you are keeping up and are working on finishing up your February topper and in getting ready to start your March one. We look forward to seeing all of your finished table toppers. We will be participating in the Riley Blake Bench Pillow of the Month program, which starts this month with a bench pillow themed for every season. And we do have a little bit of availability still left to participate in that program. Thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.